Welcome, fellow armchair generals, to Uncle Sam's Events. Well, really, Coastal Artillery Mod as a preview of Uncle Sam's Events. This is the only event I made so far for the upcoming super great mod, Uncle Sam's Events. It's very similar to Third Reich events, except it's for the US and not Germany. I know you know all that, but I'm trying to be funny. I know I'm not really, but whatever. Okay, I grew up and still live around in this area, and there are a few coastal forts still remaining. They're sort of like national parks or whatever. They're not active military bases. I think even the Presidio in San Francisco is now entirely no longer a military base, but there were coastal forts up there. And way back in the days of playing Black Ice for Hearts of Iron 3, I looked for some of the coastal forts being there, and they weren't. No, it's not a Black Ice problem, it's a Hearts of Iron problem, because here we are on Hearts of Iron 4, and no coastal forts for the United States. It's sort of kind of a feeling to some degree within the developers. If it hadn't been for the earlier versions of Hearts of Iron, they would sort of want to just sort of keep the United States as sort of one sort of, I don't know, super boss enemy at the end of the game, and not really have the United States even really sort of on the map, is sort of an off-map, province kind of thing, that this is where units spawn and then you take them off somewhere else to go fight in the war. But since there was already been in the earlier versions, and I think very correctly so, especially when their new sort of free-form abilities to play, you should do the whole planet, United States. Well, the United States Coastal Artillery Corps was a corps level organization responsible for coastal, harbor, and anti-aircraft defense of the United States, figuring that most aircraft was going to come over the coast, of course. Between 1901 and 1950, the coastal forts were a major part of the United States defense system, and they're missing in Hearts of Iron 4. This is a very small preview, yes, okay. Of course, one of the reasons that I think the Swedish developers, I know they're from a few other countries other than Sweden, didn't put them in, at least they didn't hear about them early on in the game, development phase and before, because they really didn't do much in World War II. Should have probably looked this up before, but maybe it was submarine, but I think it was some Japanese like light cruisers or something, but maybe it was submarine, approached somewhere up in, whether it was in, we should maybe do this a little bit later. Yeah, we'll talk about it later once we click on this. I want to talk. So now the Coastal Artillery Corps starts in 1901, but coastal forts go back way before the period, even theoretically to the American Revolution, with West Point and up in here, and similar sorts of things, definitely through the Civil War. You get outside of Charleston, you have Fort Sumter that many of you have heard of, and they went up until 1950 as a active defense. Constantly over this period, they were modernized, rebuilt. Sometimes you can go see the old sort of, I sort of call them Valbundian style star forts, with black powder cannon in them, and then, a few thousand yards away or something, you find a more modern, and we'll talk about the pictured fort here, next to it, replacing it because things go on and then get improved over time. Now, what you're seeing here is a photo from, I believe, the interwar period. They're still wearing the sort of, no, this is the event image style I'm going to continue using for my mods. Recently, if you look on the Third Reich event thread, you'll see how we've currently shifted this and displayed it differently. Looks much better. We like that. I'm going to use that for now until we can change other things, but I'm not using it for this mini mod here because it will then display all the other event images from whether the standard game or other mods funny, so you just get to see this one that's sort of funny, but I want you to see it. That's obviously, I presume it's obvious, symbol for the Coastal Artillery Corps. But what I really want to talk about here in this photo is this gun. It's called a disappearing gun. These were made mostly during the Endicott period of the coastal forts. He was, I think, the head of whatever the department that was in charge of them. This is an army department, not a naval department. So what they would do is, these guns, as I said, are disappearing. This gray area is a wall of either concrete or brick or whatever. I think pretty sure it's concrete. And you can see a little bit of grass right there. There's that wall is fairly thick, and then there's a huge amount of earth out in front of it. And you can see right there, that's sort of the horizon of the sea out there. So you're out looking over the water. These were designed to be somewhat camouflaged into the background, maybe with a bit of a hill immediately behind them or not. You can see the steps going down here, and the barracks are, and the ammo storage and all that are under the guns. Now this gun here is, I believe, preparing to fire. So it's up over the edge. When it is being loaded, it's lower down. They have a sighting device which looks up over the edge. The gun is still lower down, and then it's moved up into this position, and then they check the accuracy and then pull the cord or whatever to fire the gun. And this is just so you can spend all the time you want to aiming the gun while the gun is completely hidden from view of anybody out at sea. When you think you're ready to shoot, it rises up into this position, it fires, and its own recoil of the gun immediately pops it down behind this wall here. And there's normally like 2 or 3 guns along this section. I used this so that you could see some detail as opposed to a larger image, or an image that shows a larger area of it. So when you're out at sea, generally speaking, ships need to keep moving, because if you stop moving, you start to wallow in the sea. You drift with whatever the current or the tides may be. So you normally keep moving. Plus, of course, you have the ship itself, because of pitching and rolling with the ocean, depending on the current state of the ocean or the sea at the time. So with a moving gunnery platform, it's rather hard to hit things. And normally, when these guns were designed, these were very big naval guns that would fairly much kill anything out there. Now, because all these are set up as I examined and looked at several different sources, the state in 1936. At the beginning of 36, some of it may have bled into 36. They did continue to improve them through until at least the middle half of America's involvement in World War II. So, but this is the 36th state of them. So this gun probably wouldn't penetrate the armor on the heavier battleship at the time period that we're looking at in 36 and later. And the battleships and the heavier cruisers Battle cruisers have heavier guns on these, which just means that they can go out of range of this gun and shoot at the fort. But, and yes, I'm sure spies for all the major naval powers had wandered around the American coast and identified the locations and put them on a chart. Please, if you think I'm going into too much detail, I'm sorry, but I know the current American education system, and unless you've educated yourself, you might not know these things and some of the terms. I know many of you non-English as first language speakers know it better than I do, but some of you may not. A chart, of course, is a map, but for use at sea, but it identifies objects that you can be seeing from the sea. Doesn't, puts a road on it if you can see the road from the sea. But so the naval charts would show the location, and they would try to be as specific as they can, and with good navigation and the trigonometry that naval personnel can do, they can get pretty good at figuring out where they are, but still it's a bit harder to precisely put it. And so if you can't quite exactly spot where this fort is from the sea, and if you're so far out that the gun can't hit you, you're going to have more and more difficulty, and even if it's two forts firing at each other at that range, guns become less accurate. But as I said before, all the various conditions at sea, it's harder to hit things very far out. And so even if you more or less know where the fort is, if you hit below it, there's lots and lots of earth with the, I believe mostly concrete, but some of them may have still been using brick or stone in some of the earlier things. There's so much earth that can take a lot of impacts, and so if you hit low, most shots aren't going to do any damage at all to the fort. And if you're just slightly above it, you're just going to go right over the fort and keep going. You're not going to hit it. So you either need to hit right on the lip of this, which of course is a very hard target to do, or you need to, and as they definitely had by this time, though I don't know how good they would be, airburst rounds to have explode right over the fort, not a little early, not a little late, right over the fort. Of course, you can use plunging fire up and over in an arc and land on it, but again, if you're way out to sea, you're not going to have somebody being close in, being able to spot where your rounds, if they're hitting not just right or left of the target, but if they're hitting short or hitting long, it's still going to be a very hard target to hit. So that these would be a considerably difficulty to hit, even if you take something big like the Yamato. Now, you bring the Yamato close enough with their big 18-inch guns, and you have this on a chart, pretty soon you're going to reduce this fort down to near nothing. But that's the Yamato, and then you're down to basically being, I believe it's the next are the American 16-inch guns of the the New Jersey class, but there's the New Jersey, Missouri, and several, the late war American battleships. Most of the other battleships drop, I think, into the 12 or 14-inch range, but there's still only a few of them around. This, I'm pretty sure, this Endicott area cannon would punch through most cruisers' armors. So what if the cruiser can stand out and shell it? I don't think they're going to hit too many of these forts. Now, of course, what they're protecting can be hit, meaning if they're protecting a harbor in which there's ships in it, or a city where there's manufacturing, you could shell over it. Now, so you could do that definitely, but these guns could do a wicked amount of damage, and this is what's critical for this game, to landing forces, because they can sit there and be silent, and as you're coming into approach, you can shell them all you want, but they won't open up until, whether it's troop ships or landing barges or fire support vessels, come within effective range of the guns, then they can open up on them and do devastating damage, I do believe. They would. So these were spread over a great many areas of the United States. So that's what this event does. Now, as I was mentioning here earlier, and you can see, well, here's what they look like, and they're on the map. Not sure if it was at this location or up in the Seattle area. I believe, like I was saying earlier, some Japanese vessels came in and were spotted as they were coming in within range of, oh, I gotta remember to stop this, of the guns. And this was the only time that I know of the guns that had vessels within the range, but they, and a lot of these Endicott forts were 2 or 3 forts in different locations. This is covering 2 provinces here and actually 2 different states, but they're actually, it's sort of the mouth of this river is what they're covering, and that there's supposed to be a port here. That's why they're covering it. But no, again, well, I guess it's this port. Now this, I've also added some ports as well, which we'll get to when we get over here. I forget which. One is Portsmouth, and the other one is Newport. Not Newport, Rhode Island, but I believe up in here, Newport, Maine. Those were significant shipping ports at the time, but I mean not New York shipping level, but city. But so this also adds in a few of those. But the commander is commanding of these bases is in multiple locations, and he got on the phone once he got notified that, again, I think there were light cruisers, 1 or 2, was coming in there, and he you can see the port. I didn't modify the placement, and the placement sticks it right in front of this port or factory or whatever right here. I think it's port image here. Ordered them under no conditions, even if fired upon, were they to return fire, because they did not want to confirm the even if they were firing on the city, they didn't want to confirm the locations of the masked batteries to the enemy, or give away their effective calibers or range, meaning why did they fire when they were here but not out here, or whatever it might be. He thought they were trying to draw their fire, and he knew that just a couple of ships wasn't a serious raid. It wasn't like a prelude to an invasion, which is what they were, or there wasn't also significant military assets, meaning there weren't a bunch of ships in the port that they needed to defend. So they kept that quiet. So that's sort of why I think, to a large degree, the Paradox team has not included them, is because they had no real actions in the war. But just because you didn't invade the USA doesn't mean that some players invade. And I want to talk about here. Most of the fort's guns were on the south. This is a very narrow, the Golden Gate Bridge was built by this time, but a very narrow entryway. Most of the forts were on the south side, a few were on the north. You go a little bit farther north along here, you get to the point you can't effectively land. It's almost cliff-like up in the northern parts of Marin County. So if you're going to come in now, so what I've done is, this is a level 4 fort, and these are, I think, all level 4 forts. There was, I believe, on one, because there's several islands, the famous one, of course, being Alcatraz, but there were several islands in San Francisco Bay. One of them did have some significant naval guns that covered the port entrance. These naval forts do not fire at ships passing by that get near. It's only if you're directly landing do they affect the game. So I estimate the defensive level, based on my research, at approximately level 3. But since you can, whether the AI or the human can invade one of these more internal provinces, and I don't think so much it'd be Sacramento, I think it's more Stockton was the inland port, and it's more down this way if I'm remembering my geography. And Stockton, most of you won't have heard of it, but it's fairly far inland, but it's navigable up the river. Not super modern super cargo container ships, but to medium-sized freighters of the period. So that you come in a ways is definitely, but Sacramento is much further in than I don't think you can get there, but I may be wrong about that. I don't know. I've been there a lot, but mostly I avoid Sacramento directly. But so I decided to overbuild the forts to cover the idea that anybody who's coming in through the mouth of San Francisco Bay is going to get shot to hell. So that's why that's a bit heavier and a bunch more of them than normal, just because of the geography needing to affect it. All the rest along here are where they should be here in Los Angeles. Though I really think the city is a little bit more inland from the port than the port here, but this is more Orange County location. I don't know why they put the built-up city here in the harbor. The harbor is is down in here and sort of away from the city, particularly at the time. You would actually sort of almost drive through. Countryside might be a bit overstating it, but local little sort of farmlands to get from, the sort of downtown LA to get to Los Angeles port. And this is sort of supposed to be Long Beach here, which was significant because it's both Long Beach and Long Beach Harbor, the port of Long Beach and the port of LA are both inside the same breakwater, but they're two significantly different harbors. It was Long Beach was where the major naval weapon naval station was, actually in the port of Long Beach. But the main west coast of all of the naval facilities, the main west coast one, was down here in San Diego, which did have forts, though the second one I would put up here in San Francisco Bay. So that's sort of your east coast defenses. Don't want to miss it. We also have the level 2 out here guarding Honolulu Harbor in Hawaii. They had significant coastal forts, but also some other defensive that would deal for land forts, so I gave them a standard, just a level 1 land fort here to represent, and it should affect hopefully both seas, because I know there were batteries on both sides, but they were pretty significant. The U.S. took security of the Panama Canal seriously. And like I say, up here in Maine, got to remember the world knew us as Yankees mainly because most of the shipping that America did up and through to the end of the 19th century was done by New Englanders, people from up here. It was a much higher percentage, and they were the Yankees, as we would think. So these we just became level 3 harbors. I mean, they're not Boston Harbor at level 8 or New York here at level 6, but I assessed them to be a bit more. Now, and I added a few other harbors, like here in Rhode Island, because why do you have a significant naval fort for, or landing fort here? It's just a 1, but it's to guard a port, because it was set up, and these were to some degree production harbors as in producing ships, as well as moving cargo and goods. Now, if you think purely this particular event purely makes the U.S. stronger, it probably does on the whole make it stronger, but adding more ports here can also make it weaker in that these are easier to invade, particularly if, like one of my strategies, if enough of you watch, is German island hopping across the north, get into Canada, then come down through here. Quicker and easier to secure some ports for supply reasons. So these would have to be defended for that purpose. Potentially from a land attack as well as a naval invasion. So you have the additional forts up here, and they were serious about those forts, and then you're down into there. Similarly down here in Providence, but there were also down in New York counter guns closing off the entrance into here. I wrestled with adding them here because, again, the San Francisco thing, I probably should, but I haven't, just because You're getting more and more farther afield, and it isn't quite as closed as the Golden Gate Bridge. At least that's my assessment of it. And then they had some guns over in New York and Newark in New Jersey, opposite New York here, as well as the New York City harbor defenses. A little bit in Philadelphia. Now Baltimore was also fairly heavily defended. Oh boy, forgetting where the Star Spangled Banner was fought during the 1812 war. The fort here, sorry, blanking on that. This area was also heavily set up and over the years upgraded, and both sides, though this works for Washington on this side, as well as trying to come up into here, because there were some ports here covering as well as there, well as covering, and I don't know whether I should do this one here, because there were these ports out on the end, and I probably should, but I just a bit of a stickler for history. You know, these are just level ones, but these were out here covering ships that could come up into the Potomac area and land. And finally down here, Norfolk, which has the shipbuilding naval dockyards here, which they got very right there, are being protected as well. Get down here, some down in the Carolinas, here down in Miami they had some, up along the Florida coast, and I added some ports here as well covering there. And then you get into not so much here, but you have New Orleans with level 1. Then you have down here in the Houston area some more forts. So that's sort of the American forts. Bit of a history lesson. Now, also in the history lesson, I forget the London Naval Treaty, the first big one that built down. The U.S. built, coming up to the London Naval Treaty, the U.S. Navy was planning on building some major new battleships. I think they were 10-inch guns for them. And they had already started production. I think it was around 24 guns that they were building for those ships that they had gotten completed by the time the treaty was signed and passed. So the production of the ships was scrapped. Well, they took time transferring those guns, mostly just they were completed as the barrels, because that's sort of the significant part of them. They didn't scrap the guns, because they were at least smart enough to not scrap the guns, because the guns themselves weren't banned under the treaty, just no new ships carrying them. Transferring them from the Navy to the Army, and the Army was emplacing them. By this time they're realizing the great flaw in the Endicott style fortresses is there is no top cover. They were intended to be that way, just as hard to hit, but now they were realizing the ability for carriers to come along and bombard them. And they were pretty, obviously you can throw up some level of camouflage nets and things like that if you're worried about being spotted from the air, but still they were somewhat easily to spot, and there was absolutely no protection from the air for attack. I don't know if they had a program once the war was started, or getting ready to actually put anti-aircraft batteries around the guns to protect them from air attack. I would have, that would have made sense. But they started to build taking these, I believe, 10-inch guns and putting them in concrete casemates, like you used to seeing on the German Atlantic Wall type defenses, which, you know, they still had a limited arc of fire, and so they were, you know, but put around with heavy amounts of concrete, steel reinforced concrete. And they had started doing some of that, and that comes into some of my calculations as to levels of the fortress. By 36, So from 36 to around 39 or whatever was the main period of emplacing those guns as the wars were looming. Picking a site, digging sort of a hole for it and pouring all the concrete is relatively cheap compared to the cost of making the guns, even if you still needed to make some of the mounting elements. And they also made a bunch of the ammunition to fire in the guns. And in reading, even after, once they got them all in place, after the war was going for a few years, like in 43 or 44, and some of the very valuable port defensive places, I believe, on the East Coast here were realized to be very unlikely to be attacked, just because Germany and Italy had lost their fleets by that time, and thought that whatever Italian battleships may have, or one or two German battleships may be in existence, the Italians weren't coming out of the Mediterranean, and one or two raiders was thought to be very sinkable by aircraft. So they actually dismounted a few of those guns, and I believe moved them over to the west coast, or I don't know, reinforcing the Panama Canal or someplace like that. So they actually were thought to be useful enough mid-war to dismount these guns out of their casemates and build new casemates in some other locations and mount them in that. So this was an active, well-manned system up until the end of the war. Once obviously more and more carriers are coming along and the U.S. have used nuclear weapons, and by 1950 they realized old-style forts were no longer anything we wanted to man as a defensive ability for the U.S. And you have to remember, of course, other than a few pipsqueak little islands down here, and I'm sorry if I offended anybody living down there, but that's what they are, you only have really Canada and Mexico with any close ports of any significant sized nation, that if we're being attacked, it's going to be coming from a major fleet coming in, but those forts will do no good. And that if you're getting a major, even like you saw for the Japanese fleet coming into Hawaii, you're starting to, with more and more radar, starting to see a major fleet coming near to the U.S. You're preparing for a war where, my opinion, could even to this day still be useful, trying to close narrows from a Russian breakout. You might want to keep them out of the Sea of Marmara or something. Turkey might want to do that, or Sweden or Denmark might want to have the ability to close off these ports. So you very well may want to use naval guns in a modern sense, especially with the better and better ability to shoot down ballistic missiles as ships have them, and you can protect your naval guns with the various CIWS type close-in weapon systems that ships have. You can mount them on land for the gun types as well as the missiles. It is very hard to both intercept and deflect a 16-inch gun shell. I'm an advocate of the U.S. should build some battleships and should maintain 4 sounds like a good number, 4 proper modern battleships, because if you're land-based or even sea-based, it's 16-inch naval gun shell is hard to take out, with an interception missile. So if I were nations interested in closing some of these straits as part of your strategic outlook, I would definitely. And of course, even if whether you want to close straits here or some other place, consider that as still being a useful modern policy. But the U.S. didn't need to do that anymore. So that's what this whole of this mod does. It should be, the way I put it together, as an event instead of changing the map. It should be compatible with just about any mod that I can conceive of, except ones that are changing the state and providence ID number, so that either the state number for New England gets moved to the central Russia, or the province numbers get shifted around hopefully any of you guys, and as I posted recently, I think this map sucks. Reasons that's a state, really? Yes, obviously Texas is a state in the United States, but Texas is about, well, the Belgian Congo's a bit bigger, but which these are ridiculously huge too. This to here, and if you look at it on a map that actually overlays it in the right dimensions, because that's closer to the equator, things are close pushed in, that's almost from here to here, that distance that we're talking about. But you know, this giant state I advocated to being moved into 4 states, and so and we were just talking about the San Francisco Bay Area that I have some problems with, and other things that I was thinking that this map sucks. It's not so much referring to the look of the map here, but the various states and provinces and things like that that I think suck. But one of them is the lack of coastal forts for the U.S., that it was a major program. Probably, I'm just thinking about, I don't know of any other nation in World War II, and that includes Germany's Atlantic Wall. Now, of course, theoretically, Atlantic Wall goes from all the way up here to Spain, but and if you include all of that and all the coastal defenses, that might start getting bigger than the U.S. coastal fort system, manpower, gun size, calibers, because, like I was saying, they were very much continuing it during the war. So maybe if you include all of that, they're getting bigger for the Germans than the Atlantic Wall. But it's definitely bigger and more gun firepower than what was done in this region of the Atlantic Wall. And that there, like I was saying, there was considerable building before and in particularly early war period in reinforcing this stuff. So thanks for watching. I know I've gone on long about this, but I thought this was an interesting topic, and of course wanted to talk about the future mod Uncle Sam's events. That event was part of originally Third Reich events, moved into this other one. I did release a version of it, though I found a couple little bugs I'm going to be uploading probably before you see this. The new version minus a couple of, basically the text wasn't displaying correctly with the version that I first released. So that will be an upgrade, and that's all. I have a few other American events that might get stuck into that thing as a preview. It's purely a preview. It isn't in any way started, meaning it's really Uncle Sam's events release. No, it's Coastal Forts is the name of the mod, a preview of Uncle Sam's events. But first, of course, I'm going to continue building Third Reich events until that's ready to be released. But so obviously, if you're interested in, get the mod, put it in. It should be useful with anything else out there. Thanks so much for watching. Thanks for liking the videos. Please post questions, comments, suggestions, ideas, whether for the mod or for better videos. Either way, thanks so much. See you next time for more Hearts of Iron.